pals, I'm here today to talk about the 7 books I read in the month of April. So I had a massive TBR for April. I had over 20 books on it. Sort of a combination of factors led to me only reading 7 of them, and actually quite a few of those weren't actually from the TBR. Firstly, I DNF'd 6 books, and most of those books were on the TBR. They were books I wanted to read from the library. I don't speak about DNFs here because it would just take way too much time in a monthly reading wrap up, but I do talk about it over on my Patreon, and that video for April should be coming up within the next week. So if you are a patron at tier 2, you can go watch that, or if you would like to be, then it's always linked down below. So yeah, I spent time reading books that I ended up not finishing, and then also YouTube recommended to me one day the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial, and I became a little bit obsessed. Like, it's not even that interesting a case, but it's just really interesting to watch a live trial. So I would estimate that I've watched probably about 48 hours of it, which is obviously obscene. And yeah, also I don't even know, I just had days where I didn't really read much because of the trial, and days where I didn't read much because of other reasons. So yeah, didn't manage what I sought out to. Let's hope that May turns that all around. I have lots of annual leave and bank holiday weekends in May because there's 2 bank holidays in May in the UK. It's also my birthday, so I always book time off for that, and we're also going away for the weekend with Johnny's family to Centre Parks. So yeah, I've got quite a lot of time off, so fingers crossed I will use that time to read. So I'm going to start with the 2 books that I will be talking about in another video, and that's because they're 2 fantasy books. And right at the start of the year I did a TBR video for the 12 fantasy books I wanted to read this year. I will link that video up above. I'm making really good headway, and even though I've been having mixed results, I've been really enjoying reading more fantasy. And actually, when I read one fantasy, I feel like I just want to go straight into the next and like just stop reading any of the other stuff I read. So it has been really nice and just a really sort of refreshing change. So I did read 2 of the books off my TBR in April. One of them I borrowed from the library, so I've since returned it, and that was the Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. I ended up giving this one 2 stars. I was quite disappointed in it because I read one of her other books before, the first in a duology, which I can't remember the name of, but I will pop a picture up somewhere. And I enjoyed it, but had a few issues, which ended up meaning I sort of felt sort of mediocre about it. And I think I actually gave that one a higher rating, although I don't know how fair that is. So this one ended up being a 2-star read for me, and like I said, I'll talk about it much more. Every time I read 4 of the books off the TBR, I'm doing a video talking about those 4. So once I've read a couple more, I'll do a video, which I hope will be this month, because I would like to read a couple more fantasy at least this month. I think the concept of the world was really great. I think she can write like sentence by sentence level. She's quite slow paced and descriptive, which are things I really like in fantasy. But I just felt that the plot itself left some stuff to be desired. There was too many, it was like multiple POV but 3rd person, and I feel like everybody to a degree sort of melded together and didn't feel different enough. And I also felt that the characters just didn't really feel that individual, and there's a romance in it that I didn't really believe. And I also feel with fantasy at the moment, it's a new thing to write on the back, oh, you know, these sort of morally grey characters, or someone who's like doing a bad thing for the wrong reasons, and it's always like on the blurb like it's a really big deal. And I feel like 20 years ago that was just a norm in fantasy, but it wasn't made out to be like such a unique thing. And I think it was over-egged a bit in this book's blurb that the characters are like really morally grey and stuff, and I just don't think there was like a ton of nuance there, or as much nuance as I was perhaps expecting. So yeah, that was a 2-star read. However, I did then read Rules of Ascension by David B. Coe, which is a much older book, and I heard Chris from the channel, Chris's Bookish Cauldron, rave about this one, and I get most of my successful fantasy recommendations from Chris, and I absolutely love this. I gave this one 5 stars. This is a super complicated fantasy to describe, so I won't, but I will in that proper review video. What I'll say about this is it has a really interesting opening in terms of the politics of the world to do with different species. There are morally grey characters, but they are actually morally grey, and you really feel for them, and you feel like in their shoes you'd perhaps make, you know, the wrong decisions they're making for perhaps the right reasons. There's lots of really interesting characters. I really enjoyed the magic system. I loved everything about this, and I actually gave it 5 stars. There's a part of me that feels like it's more like a 4.5, but I enjoyed this much more than other fantasy books I've given 4 stars, so I gave this 5. The only thing that stopped me from being like absolutely head over heels is that there are a lot of characters. So you're introduced to a lot of people, and because of that, there's only really one character at this point that I super like don't want to die, but I'm not like in love with them, and I feel like that's a really big part of fantasy for me, that I want to absolutely like really love or really hate some characters. And right now there's just like, it's too early, like there's too many people maybe for that to be the case. So I feel like this is a 5-book series. I feel like some of the later books I could like absolutely crazily adore, but this was still a 5-star read for me. I would 100% recommend it if you enjoy fantasy, and like Chris has said, it would just be great to see more people read it, because I think it really deserves like a bigger like modern readership. So there's that one, but I will talk about that more in that video. And then I read 2 books which I did mention in my TBR video with mixed results. One of them being Sundial by Catriona Ward. This is a recent release that I had reserved at the library, and then I saw it in person in a bookshop and was like, oh, it's really beautiful, I think it's going to be a 5-star, I'm just going to treat myself to it. Massively regret it, didn't really enjoy this at all. So I read The Last House on Needless Street last year by this author, which was a super buzzy release, and I absolutely adored her writing style, but without spoiling anything, I didn't really like the way, or I didn't feel comfortable with the way the story went, particularly based on the fact that the author isn't own voices, and I don't know. But I heard some people say that they felt it had been handled well. I'm never sure how I'm gonna have to like, if you don't want to know anything at all, no, I'll explain what this book is about first before I give any sort of tiny spoilers. The premise of this book is it's set in the modern day, and we're following a mother who has 2 young daughters, and she thinks that one of them is maybe like a little bit evil and like fucked up. So she takes her out to the Mojave Desert, where she has her old sort of family home, and you get the sense that this old family home like sounded a little bit like isolated and maybe like cultish, and the book splits, and you're in the modern day with the mum and the daughter, as you're starting to think like one of them might harm the other in some way, because they both seem a bit messed up in their head. And then you're also looking back on the mother's life growing up at this place in the Mojave Desert called Sundial. And initially this started, and I don't know, I didn't feel like the writing style sung as much for me as it did in The Last House on Needless Street. I don't know why. When I read that book, I really got the feeling of like all the hairs on my neck standing up and all that sort of thing. And I didn't sense that as much with this, although I will say there is, her husband is horrendous, and I think the way she wrote that sort of gaslighting and domestic abuse was well done, and that it was really difficult to read. But yeah, I just didn't get such a sense of, I don't know, of the atmosphere, and it's a very different atmosphere, so maybe it's just that it didn't work as much for me as the other one. And then, yeah, once they got out there, I was just like, I don't really know how much I care about what this like secret reveal of her childhood is. And then once things did start being revealed, it felt a little bit like she'd got like a checklist of like loads of sort of crazy, outlandish, but also fairly obvious, overdone things to sort of tick off in this novel. There's a sort of, in her childhood she has a sister, and they're very close, and it's like very stereotypical, like what if sisters get too close, like that just felt super unoriginal to me. Having this sort of cult-like commune type place in the desert felt really overdone. There's other elements of the story that I don't want to spoil that just felt super checklisty, and all those things being pulled together just felt like too much in one note. It felt like at the same time really slow and plodding, but then towards the end really like, oh my god, all these crazy things were in one narrative. So I didn't think it was successful at all. And one thing I felt a little bit with The Last House on Needless Street, but I felt much more with this, and this is a slight spoiler for the type of stories this author is writing. It doesn't give away the plot, but it does give away, like, I guess, a theme. So if you don't want to know, like, skip until you see me not holding this book up anymore, if you're still here. In the author's latest books, The Last House on Needless Street and this one, she uses mental health issues and PTSD as a plot device for horror. And based on her like biography in the back and what I know of her, I think she does her research well for each book, but I don't think she has any direct experience with that, and that she doesn't work as a psychologist or anything like that. She doesn't work in the mental health field. And I just don't know how comfortable I feel about someone clearly having an interest in exploring PTSD and mental health through horror. I find it a little bit, it just feels a little bit off, to be honest. And I don't know what the author's trying to say there about like what people who have been through really horrific things then become capable of. Yeah, I don't know how well that sits with me, and I felt that much more in this novel than I did in The Last House on Needless Street, and I already felt uncomfortable with that one. So for me, yeah, I won't read any more of her books because of that. And it just feels like that's the thing she does now, so I don't know. So that was, you know, a 2-star read for me. It's not a 1-star because she can 100% still like write, but yeah, for many reasons that one didn't work for me. And the next one I picked up on the same day as I picked up Sundial, but I had much better results with, is Violets by Hyde. This is a very beautiful book. This is quite a short book, just over 200 pages, and it's written in quite a sort of vignette-y style like that. The premise of this is set in the sort of final days of World War II, and we're following 2 women who are both called Violet. One of them loses her baby as the novel starts and is told that she will be unable to have children in the future, and her husband can't cope with it, and so he takes an overseas posting to Burma, and we're sort of following her in the months after as she tries to sort of deal with what she's been through and consider what her life will be like going forwards. And then the other woman called Violet is a younger woman who's unmarried and lives with her mother and is in a small Welsh town, and she falls pregnant and decides to take an overseas posting, Naples I think, to try and sort of hide the pregnancy from her mother and the people in her village. And I think like even from the blurb you can get a sense of like where this novel's going to go. Like one woman wants this child and has been told that she can't have them, and this other woman like perhaps doesn't want this child or is unsure how to have this child in her life. You get the sense these stories are going to somehow converge. So I don't think anything about the plot in and of itself is surprising. You don't read this for the plot. It's incredibly beautifully written, and a lot of it reads like poetry. There's a word when words don't rhyme exactly, but they sound close enough that it reads like they rhyme. I can't remember what that word is, but lots of the novel is written like that. So if you were to read this aloud or listen on audio, if there's an audio available, it has a real rhythm, which I really enjoyed. And yeah, I thought the themes explored are really beautiful. The idea of, well, I don't want to say, but yeah, where this novel goes, I think it explores really well both the experiences these women have. The reason I didn't absolutely love this novel, and I thought perhaps I would and this would be a book of the year, is because I'm definitely a character reader, and I think in a story that's, you know, only around a couple of hundred pages and doesn't have a ton of text to a page, this book is much more focused on the writing and exploring the lives these type of women would have lived. And so each individual Violet doesn't feel super like her own fleshed out person just because you don't get to spend enough time with her. So they feel more like women who are like living this certain life path, and through them we get to see what that experience may have been like. Does that make sense? So I think had this been a longer novel, you would have had time to connect with each of these women individually. As like, I'll remember this novel for the themes it explored and the writing, but I won't look back and be like, God, that Violet was like all these little things about her and like she's an unforgettable character, because I don't think it was as much about that for me. But I did really enjoy it. I think if you're someone who enjoys historical fiction that explores the roles of women and likes beautiful writing, you should definitely give this one a go. And then these last three, which I'm barely going to talk about, and to be honest, probably going to forget which one is which. At the end of the month, I just felt like reading books that I get through really quickly. So I picked up Don't You Forget About Me by McFarlane, which I had up from the library and have since returned. And I've read one of her books before, which was called Last Night, or Just Last Night. It has a different name in different countries. And I quite enjoyed that. And so I've read 2 of her books this month. I read Don't You Forget About Me and Mad About You, which is her book that's just come out. And having now read 3 of her books, what I'll say is, this is probably what would be described as like women's fiction, or I don't know if it would be described as chick lit. So I think the covers of her books are a little bit deceiving, in that these are sort of romance, but the romance is probably like 20% of the novel, and the rest of the novels are focused on quite serious and dark issues that the protagonist is dealing with. So for example, in the first book I read of hers, one of the narrators is dealing with the death of her best friend, and then finding out some things about her best friend that she didn't know about. In one of the women is dealing with the death of her father and sort of some unresolved issues to do with that, and also sort of triggers for sexual assault, and that is in Don't You Forget About Me. And then in Mad About You, and this is what I mean, like I'm forgetting, doesn't sound good, does it, that I've forgotten what it was about. Can't actually remember, but she's dealing with, is that the one where I had, this is what I mean. So I feel like the woman in her novel and the men do sort of run together. The men don't get much page space because they're not really the point in the novel. If you're looking for romance, in all honesty, and these 2 I read this month, the romance doesn't actually, like, not even a kiss happens until like 96% of the way through, which I think if you want romance, like, that's not enough really. Yeah, and I just feel like she's dealing with quite similar themes, and I've read some of her other blurbs, and like a couple of the other books sound nearly the same. So I enjoy them. I can read them in one sitting. They're very easy to read, but having read them both in the last week, I can't even, without reading the blurbs, remind myself of what happened in each of them. And I would probably still say that out of the 3 I've read, Just Last Night is the strongest one, and I think that's because it's the longest. I think that one's like 500 and something pages, whereas the 2 I read in April were 400 pages each, and I think they just had less page space to, like, you know, talk about this stuff. Oh yeah, that's what the Mad About You is about. She has this boyfriend who proposes to her in front of his family, who she hates, and she doesn't actually want to marry him. So she accepts because everyone's watching, and then the next day she leaves him. And there's also a history of a previous relationship she's been in, which was very emotionally abusive and sort of filled with gaslighting, and so she's sort of dealing with that. So yeah, I enjoy them both. I think I will pace them out a bit more because they do feel very similar. And I feel like full-on romance novels are maybe a bit too like romance heavy and not enough other life stuff, but Mhairi McFarlane's are like too much the other way. So I feel like what I want to find is an author who like does more, you know, a bit more romance, but like even. So let me know, recommend me authors to read. And then on the last day of the month, because I just felt like reading a quick and easy book again, I picked up Welcome to Your Life by Bethany Rutter, which I think is probably a new book. And I've read one of her YA books, which was No Big Deal, which I actually quite enjoyed, and I probably enjoyed it more than this one. But again, this could be just because I just read 2 other books of a similar nature, and they were all starting to sort of run together for me, especially because I read them all very closely together. So Welcome to Your Life is about a plus-size woman who leaves her groom at the altar in the first chapter and decides to move to live with a friend in London and sort of restart her life, and she decides to start going on a date a week to try and sort of like revive her life, because she's been with this guy for 10 years and she doesn't really know how to date. And again, this book probably has the amount of romance and real life stuff I want, so I feel like actually this book did hit that spot. So if you've read this and it brings to mind other books in terms of how much romance there was, then do recommend me those other books, because an awful lot of this book is exploring her friendship with 2 of the women in her life, one being her old friend who is queer, and one being a new friend she makes at work who is also plus size and I think bisexual. And because of that, that friend is like super body positive and doesn't have any issue with her size, and our main character Serena does. And so for example, she like keeps choosing people on these dating apps who she thinks, I'm not really attracted to them, but they probably they'd probably be willing to date a fat girl. Whereas like the guy she actually fancies, she'll like not, like whatever it is, whichever way you swipe, she won't swipe the way to date them because she thinks they won't choose her. And so the book is sort of like her moving through all these dates as she makes decisions about this. And another little bit of this book that I liked is that she like makes all her own clothes, and there's like a lot of commentary about you know, fashion brands not being inclusive enough and how that can change. So I enjoyed this. I don't know how like on the nose this is, if this is something you think about a lot. You could think, oh, you know, like the friend she has at work sort of says all the things that like the book wants to teach you. But I think that was fine. But I think for me, the like romantic interest in this, who ends up, you know, I don't know how much I was into that choice, and so that probably yeah, just lessened it a little bit for me. I enjoyed it. Like for all of these books, I think maybe a little bit forgettable. And even though I preferred the amount of romance in the Bethany Rutter book, I do still prefer Mhairi McFarlane's books for that she has like an element of humour that I quite like. And actually in one of the books, the first chapter is set in high school, and I felt she did that quite well. So I wonder how she would do if she wrote like a romance set in like high school or university years. So yeah, those are the 7 books I read in the month of April. Like a really mixed bag, and actually only really Sundial and Violets are like the type of books I usually read. So yeah, I'm going to try and read more in May, but definitely a bit more variety. So let me know if you've read any of these books, and like I said, I would very much like some recommendations based on those last 3 books I read and what you think I would enjoy. And I hope you had a really good reading month. Let me know down below what you read and enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!